What if the dollar's greatest enemy lies not in Beijing or Moscow, but in Washington itself? What if the attempt to defend the hegemony is the very act that will hasten its collapse? When Donald Trump took the podium to launch his campaign for a second term, he spoke not as a candidate but as a commander on a global battlefield. His enemies were not just other countries but any currency that dared to challenge the American dollar. Under bright lights and waving flags, he made his most resounding promise yet: those who reject the dollar will face 100% tariffs. No deals, no diplomacy, only force. At first glance, it looked like another grand statement, a catchy phrase for the public. But to the international financial system, it sounded like a declaration of war. Trump knew what he was doing. He wasn't just defending a currency, he was trying to freeze history, stop time, and prevent the world from moving toward a new, more fragmented, and decentralized monetary system. As if decrees could hold back the tide, he declared, if we lose the dollar, it will be like losing a war, like losing a revolution. And he may have been right, but not for the reasons he thought. The dollar has always been more than just paper or digital code. For decades, it has been a symbol of an order in which the United States made the rules. Every dollar transaction confirmed who was in charge. Every barrel of oil priced in US currency was a flag in the desert. Every central bank hoarding US treasuries was unwittingly financing an empire. But what if that world had begun to unravel before Trump returned to the White House? Some countries began looking for a way out, first cautiously, then en masse. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the BRICS countries, created new banks, signed treaties in local currencies, and began buying gold as if they were stockpiling security. And Trump? He responded with tariffs, threats, and bluster. He believed that bullying would force countries into submission. He even staged an imaginary dialogue, feigning force: you're going to give up the dollar? Then don't sell us anything. We'll impose 100% tariffs and you'll come running back screaming, sir, we want to go back to the dollar. But the reality is nothing like his rhetoric. The world responded to each threat not with submission, but with distance. The echoes from Washington grew fainter, emptier. And then the tragedy of empire began. By trying to protect the dollar with tariff walls, Trump, without realizing it, had created a crack in the global financial system that hadn't been seen since Bretton Woods. There's an old saying, if you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Trump had an arsenal of tariffs and he swung them around as if the world were made of wood. But the world is not like that. It is fluid, liquid, and slips from the hands of those who try to grab it by force. Instead of saving the dollar, Trump exposed its fragility, like a man plugging a leak with explosives. Picture this: the president threatens 100% tariffs on any country that abandons the dollar, while the world's largest emerging economies have been trading in other currencies for years. Central banks are buying up gold, euros, yuan, Swiss francs, anything but dollars. Even US allies like Japan and Germany are beginning to question their dependence. While Trump was talking about force and punishment, something dangerous was happening behind the scenes. Trust was evaporating. Investors, pension funds, and private banks were rethinking their strategies not out of ideology but out of fear. Fear that the dollar, once reliable, would become a weapon and a trap. This is where the story stops being simply political, it becomes structural. Trump wanted to be the dollar's defender, but he became a wake-up call for the world. An unpredictable, aggressive leader willing to turn the world's leading currency into an instrument of blackmail. And when a currency becomes a means of revenge, it ceases to be a reliable asset. Trump did not start de-dollarization, but became its main accelerator. The irony and tragedy is that he thought to save the dollar with threats, but made it a risk. And in the logic of capital, risk is a cost that investors avoid. While Trump relied on the rhetoric of strength, the numbers told a different story. Dollar reserves were shrinking, treasury bonds were being sold, alternative currencies were gaining weight, gold was breaking records. Even US allies began to get rid of bonds and look for other reserves. What is left of this hegemony? For decades, we were told that the dollar was inevitable, that it was the lesser evil, a clean shirt in a pile of dirty laundry. Many believed it, it was convenient, stable, everyone thought so. But the dollar is not being destroyed, it is being abandoned. And not only by authoritarian regimes or countries of the global south, which are called enemies of democracy. This is being done by banks, investment funds, corporations, even historical allies. This story is not just about power, it is about the prices of goods at the store, about rising gas bills, about rent, about bills that come with big numbers, even though wages are not growing. When the world loses confidence in the dollar, it loses value. And when the dollar gets cheaper, everything gets more expensive. It is a chain reaction. Trump threatens tariffs, the world sells US bonds, yields rise, confidence falls, the dollar weakens. It all started after Liberation Day on April 2nd, when Trump announced global tariffs. A week later, the yield on 10-year US bonds jumped, the markets were in turmoil, investors fled. Who are these investors? Not revolutionaries with flags, but pension funds, insurance companies, managing the assets of millions of families. People who only yesterday believed in the reliability of the dollar. But Trump and his tariffs forced them to ask, is it worth keeping money in a place where a leader can weaponize the currency? It is as if your bank said, if you don't agree with us, you will lose your account. Would you leave your savings there? Countries and companies started to withdraw money, buying gold, euros, yen, anything but dollars. The resistance was not only coming from the outside. Wall Street, Deutsche Bank, the market itself, which Trump considered his, turned against. Deutsche Bank released a report, we are seeing the collapse of American assets, stocks, the dollar, bonds. The market has lost faith. And further, Trump's policies are accelerating de-dollarization. To protect investors from the dollar's weapon, the market sees it as a threat. This is not ideology, it is survival. When politics poisons a currency, it loses its essence and the dollar becomes empty. Think about your life. You work, save, build a safety net. But suddenly your savings melt away. It is not your fault, you simply trusted a system that has outlived its usefulness. When the dollar loses its status as a reserve currency, inflation becomes a reality. It bursts into the supermarket, eats up wages, turns stability into anxiety. This crisis began not with a collapse, but with a choice. Trump wanted to stop history with tariffs, but ideas, like rivers, find other paths. Japan, the largest holder of US debt, threatened to sell bonds because of tariffs. Germany, tired of instability, increased its gold purchases. China quietly swapped reserves for stable assets. The question is not whether another currency will replace the dollar, but that it is losing its monopoly. We are entering an era of multiple currencies, of choice, and more countries are choosing not to use the dollar. This will affect you. If the world stops financing the US deficit, America will have to print more dollars. And that is inflation, a loss of purchasing power, and the bill will come back to you. Think you know who rules the world? It is about secrets, wars, influence, about what is hidden. The strength of the US was not based only on the army or Wall Street, but on the consent of allies who were satellites of American hegemony. What if these satellites are looking for their own sun? It began in Trump's second term, and the spark was not a crash, but a tariff. The world of 2025 is no longer afraid, and those who are not afraid do not obey. Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, countries that were under the shadow of the United States are now going their own way. Not out of love for China, but out of fatigue from being pawns. Japan, under the military influence of the United States for 80 years, openly criticized Trump, calling him a tariff criminal. The Japanese finance minister talked about selling $1.1 trillion in American debt. If the most loyal ally doubts, what does it expect from others? Vietnam responded to Trump's tariffs with a visit by Xi Jinping and 40 agreements with China, a lesson in diplomacy. South Korea, despite historical wounds, sat down at the table with Japan and China to resist the US trade war. The world no longer revolves around the White House. How does this affect you? If Japan sells bonds, rates will rise, the dollar will fall, imports will become more expensive. You will pay at the store, at the gas station, on the bills. Allies leaving sinks the ship, and Trump has accelerated it. His policy against China has backfired. China offered stability while the US threatened. It is a reorientation. If this story touched you, made you doubtful or thirsty for knowledge, don't leave it here. Share it with those who think that everything is business as usual that is not. Trump doubled down, added fuel to the fire, and the market responded with sales. US bond yields soared. This was not an increase in attractiveness, but an escape of investors. Bonds, which had been the safest asset, became a risk. Financial publications sounded the alarm, the Financial Times about capital flight, the Wall Street Journal about the risks of China, Bloomberg about de-dollarization. China and Japan discussed selling reserves. If they start, prices will collapse, the US debt will become unbearable. The market said, we don't trust anymore. Without trust, everything collapses. This is no longer geopolitics, but mathematics. The US spends more than it earns and lives off the world. If the world leaves, all that will be left is to print money and hello, inflation. Trump attacked the Fed, demanded to lower rates, but trapped by tariffs and instability, this is impossible. While he threatens, China acts. Since 2014, it has reduced US reserves from $1.3 trillion to $700 billion, buying gold, euros, and yen. In 2024, China took 260 tons of gold, a record for half a century. Gold cannot be frozen, it does not depend on Washington. Russia, Turkey, India, and Brazil are following. This is not an accident, it is survival. Remember 2022? Freezing $300 billion of Russian reserves showed that the US can hit anyone. The Global South called it robbery and decided to abandon the dollar. China offers an alternative, trade without the dollar, Yuan, and a BRICS bank in Shanghai. The exit queue grows with each Trump tariff. There is no easy way out. China will not dump bonds abruptly, but it is slowly removing BRICS from the system. In 2024, gold exceeded $3,000 per ounce and continued to rise in 2025. This is a flight to safety. The dollar fell by 8% against the euro and 9% against the franc in 2025. The world is choosing other currencies. The carry trade strategy with the yen collapsed. Investors fled the risk of the United States. In 2025, the United States was unable to sell bonds for the first time in 40 years. The market was silent. The share of foreigners in US debt fell from 33% in 2015 to 23% in 2024. This is not a crisis, but an exit. Trump attacked the Fed, but the market does not tolerate chaos. The dollar was trust, but it broke. The world is not looking for a new center, it is creating many. The United States spends $2 trillion in deficit in 2025, foreigners cover only 20%. The rest is the printing press, inflation, a weak dollar. Trump mistook force for pressure, allies for enemies, trust for trifles. The system stands, but is tottering. The dollar will not disappear, but its era is passing. The future is multifaceted, and it is already here. If this made you think, subscribe, share. Ahead are hidden solutions, quiet wars that are not spoken about. Follow the link in the comments, learn more while it is available. The world is changing, be prepared.